Now, the International Monetary Fund has lowered its 2024 growth forecast for Nigeria's economy to 2.9%, attributing the downgrade to weaker than expected economic activities in the first half of the year. This is contained in IMF's October 2024 World Economic Outlook released during the ongoing annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF. The revised forecast represents a 0.2 percentage points decrease from the 3.1% growth forecast projected in July 2024. However, the IMF slightly raised the forecast for Nigeria's economic growth in 2025, projecting a growth rate of 3.2%, up from 3.0% in July report. But similarly, the IMF reduced its 2024 growth forecast for sub-Saharan Africa to 3.6%, down from 3.7% in July. However, raised the 2025 growth forecast to 4.2%, up from 4.1%. Well, let's talk around this and see what it means for Nigeria's economy and, of course, the globe. I have joining me this afternoon live in the studio, the Chief Investment Officer with AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde. Good afternoon, Mr. Omotunde. It is good to see you after a while.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's good to have you while we're having these projections and reprojections from the IMF and the World Bank. I don't know if you were expecting that, but for me, let's look at this review because it's reflecting slower growth and its weaker expectations from Nigeria's economy, considering a country that is going through major structural reforms. What do you make of these projections by the IMF, sincerely?
Yeah, I think the data, the reprojection came in line with, should I say, what the economy is going through. You mentioned that the economy is going through a restructuring or a structural reform, right? I'm not sure that the context of that structural reform is clear yet, because for me, it looks like as though the country is just trying to make very sensible decisions after, taking many stupid decisions, administration in and out, right? And this will bring us back to the current inflationary pressure, which is fueled by the fact that the government is doing the right thing by reducing petroleum subsidy, right, reducing electricity tariff. These are things that we have advocated for, that they are the right things to do. And we did mention that it won't come easy, right? There will be pain points, that the country may need to bear. The unfortunate thing, however, is the impact, the significant impact it's having on the generality of the Nigerian population. You have a country where we say have about 71 million Nigerians living below the poverty line. And then again, you are seeing some of these price increases that do not only affect the middle class or the high-end consumers, but also the low-end consumers. So what IMF is doing really is just putting the situation in the right perspective. In a general sense, when you have high inflationary pressure, it is expected that the economic activities will be weaker. We've tried to analyze it before. In an environment of high inflation, right, what a typical amount of money can buy, right, in terms of volume is reduced. So if you look at it, what your 100,000 naira will buy, pick any commodity, a sample commodity, and just do the number. If you had 100,000 naira this time last year, what kilogram of rice could you buy, right? Compared to now, what kilogram of rice could you buy? So you will see that the economic activity in itself would have dropped, even though the economy may have witnessed an increase in nominal transactions of, gross domestic product. So our gross domestic product has increased on the back of high inflationary pressure, but the real economic activities has also reduced. So that is what is informing IMF projection now to say, let's revise. We are revising it because of weaker economic activities. From a 3.1, the IMF is revising to a 2.9. And then you will see that in the same breath, they are increasing the projection for 2025 to 3.2. What is that? That is not that the economy is improving in any way. It's just mathematical. If you have dropped in 2024, it is expected that some mathematical increase would happen because of a lower base in 2025. And that's what is just reflecting at that level of 3.2. The question we should ask is, do we have any business being around a growth level of 2.9 or 3.1 or 3.2 for an economy that is burgeoning, that is an economy that is, at its stage of, potential growth, right? For an economy that has the capacity to do on an average, on a consistent basis, a double-digit growth, right? Do we have any business being here? The answer is no. Then what are the things that we are supposed to do to put in place? What the government is trying to do now, especially from the perspective of the central bank, is to control inflation as much as possible. But unfortunately, the more effort the central bank is putting in place, the more the reality is staring us in the face. Because don't forget, if you have deregulated the downstream petroleum sector and you are no longer paying subsidy, if it is true that you are no longer paying subsidy, the implication is that for every time there is an increase in global oil prices,
it will affect the price.
It will affect the price of the pump price of petrol. And that has nothing to do with whether government is doing anything or not. Yeah. It's just a function of increase in oil prices.
Yes,
now, the addition to it is also that as you suffer currency weaknesses, right, because of the translation from USD to Naira, right, for pump price of petrol, that also has impact on the price. So what should the government do in that sense? If the government claims that we have deregulated, which is the right thing for us to do as a country, and, we spoke off camera and you were talking about this is what economists predicted. The country has done it. Why are we where we are? The truth is that we have also said that there are pain points. I mean, just imagine the government is still paying subsidy at the moment.
At the moment, that means
we don't have the revenue to support it. Again, Nigeria is not in a very good time, right? Not because all blames can be put on government, but also because there are, and I always say this, there are some very bad decisions we have taken in the past for which to correct them now, we have to pay for some of these short-term pains that the country is currently experiencing. Now, what can we do to improve the situation? In my sense, I would think that if we can get our economy back on track from the perspective of economic activities, can we have a situation where even though there is a high level of inflation, people can earn as much as necessary for them to still maintain the standard of living that they have? And I'm not advocating for minimum wage or what have you. I'm only just saying that the country should create sufficient opportunity for people to, see what they can do to make ends meet. Because any economy that cannot make ends meet for its own citizens, despite the fact that they are engaging in economic activities, it is said that the economy is failing them. And I think that's the perspective the government will come from. It is not an easy fix. Neither is it, going to be a bed of roses, And of course, I can see what the government is doing on every front, right? Some of which is government is also trying to see how can we improve our revenue profile, right? Unfortunately, we are seeing instances where the government is also coming from by way of taxes, And again, we have to also yes, we have to be very careful.
I get. Let me take it to another point in that Outlook report, which is saying that countries with high inflation should continue, including Nigeria, should continue to tighten monetary policy. We've seen that happen for some time, and we've seen that constant move by the Apex Bank to continue to tighten. But many will say that this also has an effect, of course, on the real sector and on the larger economy. How do we do it? And it's not even bringing the figures down at the moment. They also projected that by next year, we should be at 25% inflation figures.
You see, you don't expect less from any Bretton Woods institution like the IMF or the World Bank. Because, the principles they run on, they are clear-cut economic principles.
Yep.
That are mostly orthodox in nature. What we have always advocated for is to say that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all to solving economic problems. And most times, the problem we have as a country is that we try to adopt these economic principles, these economic theories, and apply them in a dysfunctional economy like ours, where transmission mechanism is not as effective as it is in most of these developed economies. And the result is what we are seeing right now. I mean, before Godwin Emefiele left, he started tightening. The tightening cycle started in May of 2022. What have we seen year in, year out? And what the IMF is saying, you know, I wish they can put the data in proper perspective. The 25% level of inflation you will see next year is purely on base effect, not because anything is going to bring down the price. So the price of rice will remain where it is if it doesn't worsen. Do you understand? Because the factors that will cause increases in the price of food and other items or services, they are still much evident. But because inflation is an annual data that you are adjusting, you are finding the rate of change using consumer price index from the previous year to the current year. The tendency is that you are going to see a moderation because this year is the highest level of, you know, consumer price index you have seen in recent times. So when you go into 2025, naturally, it is expected that that high base effect will moderate your inflation to below the 30% level. Does that mean that the life of the people, the lives of the people will be better by then? That's not the truth. So the moderation in inflation will be purely on base effect. Will that take out the pressure in the system in terms of, because, and that's when Nigerians begin to say, oh, you say inflation is moderating, but the prices of food are still going as high as they used to be. And that's because it's mathematical. You see what I mean? So now, if we clear that point, the question would then be, when you advise countries who are still having high level of inflation to continue to tighten, excuse me, it's a recipe for another crisis that you cannot deal with. Already we are seeing the signals of those crises as we speak. Because we see corporate organizations, you just need to look into the books of some of the commercial papers that are being issued recently, which are corporate borrowings. That's for those who are not going to the banks directly to borrow. If you go to the bank to borrow, you know, the likelihood is that you are getting a rate of 35% at the moment. Clearly. So now, if you now see the corporates that are coming to the market, who are submitting themselves to the scrutiny of the market, they put their financials out there. And when you analyze these financials, you can see that these are companies that are barely, you know, as profitable as the cost of fund that they are carrying. Because if a company is at a 25%, you know, EBITDA margin, that is your earnings before you charge interest, you know, depreciation and amortization, the company is at 25%, and the company is coming to the market to raise funding at 30%. What does that mean? It means that down the line, right, if the money is used for working capital or except it's used for another product line that will increase the profitability of the company, what you're expecting to see is a company that's going to book losses, you know, in the months down the line. That is if the company does not default in paying its obligation on the commercial, you know, debt market. So the problems are much more than you can handle if you will continue to tighten. Because the question you should ask is that, to whom are you tightening? Each time you raise interest rate, who is paying for it? The government is paying for it. Look at the revenue fundamentals of government. It's not supporting it. The DMO wants interest rate to come lower so that the borrowing costs can reduce. The central bank is increasing interest rate. Government is paying more. For every time the government pays more, the debt profile of the government is increasing, and you are just kicking the can down the road because inflation will still catch up with you in the next year when you are paying back those funding, right? Then from the corporate side, where do you expect them to get the funding? And to whom are they going to pass the cost if they have an elasticity of demand that is inelastic, that allows them to push the cost to the consumer? You are passing it back to the economy. So inflation problem will never resolve. You just be moving along that cycle. Sometimes it's good to even pause and do nothing.
At least just hold on and watch. You
know, than just to keep tightening. Because most of these international economists are advising you to go that route. Let's look inward, right? We have enough homegrown solution sometimes that can solve our inflation problem. But if you will go the route of applying everything, you know, so to the extent that, you know, people look at economic principles and they just apply blindly. And it worries me. Because economics is a social science. You're applying it on humans. You're applying it on, it's not just some set of chemicals that you're applying these principles on. Sometimes you need to look inward and see how you can, you know, bring up some homegrown solution. And I'm speaking to you right now because sometimes the way we go about trying to say, okay, because the international community is advising that we should keep tightening, so we continue to tighten. To whose detriment? I mean, it will get to a point where the government himself itself will see that, we have gotten to a point where any further tightening, you can even see unrest in the country. Because there's a limit to which you can use monetary policy tool to solve a problem that was not caused by monetary policy issues. E.g., you are seeing an example of the current inflationary pressure we are seeing. People can't go for the farm, right? Should you be punishing the citizenry for the insecurity in the country that prevents the farmers from going to the farm, right? Because if you check our inflation profile, food inflation is the highest because of insecurity. So there is insecurity causing food inflation. Then you are tightening. That is stupid.
Yeah.
Just think about it.
Let's mind our words.
You know, it doesn't just add. Yes. No, I get it. I get it. No, I understand. I take that back. Right. What I'm trying to say is that, from the perspective of applying,
I get it. It doesn't just
it doesn't handle.
Align,
because if inflation is caused by cost push factors. As economists, we say inflation is either demand pull, in which case more volume of money in circulation is what is causing it, or it is cost push. In this case, largely cost push, because 51% of our food basket is 51% of our CPI is from the food basket of commodities. Now, and because you have seen a lot of insecurity coming from that line, including imported inflation, because Nigerians like exotic food. We also don't like to eat locally. We are still importing food, right? And all of those have impact on exchange rates. So I'm just saying to us now that the fact that we have a situation where cost push factors are causing inflation, it doesn't mean that hiking interest rate at all times will always solve that problem. And I think that's the caution I would advise. See, the international community, because that's what they do and apply to their own economy. They take it as the panacea to any monetary policy issue. Once there is inflation, you have to hike. It doesn't just work that way all the time. And I think that's the point we're trying to make.
All right. I thank you for making that point. And it's always interesting having Mr. Robert Omotunde here, but we're not even enough time for us to talk about all of the issues. He's the Chief Investment Officer with AfriInvest West Africa. Thank you so much. It's good to have you.
Thank you for
break this down. Let's see how it plays out. We'll keep monitoring the figures as we move towards the end of the year. Let's see what will play out considering the reforms and all of these projections. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.